Good morning, class. Welcome to the online classes for class 8 science. As we have seen in the earlier classes that we were learning about the chapter 8 that was titled as cell structure and the function. In the previous classes we have learned what the cell is and where it is found and who was the person who discovered this cell. We have seen that cell is a smallest functional unit or the structural unit of a living organ and a non-living organ also. So cell was a structural and a functional unit of the organisms. So it is the smallest unit which makes up the structure of the organ present inside a living or a non-living organism. We have seen that in the year 1665, Robert Hooke observed this in the bark of a tree which was named as cork. He had took the slices of the cork and observed that in the microscope. Then he came to see some small compartments or the type of boxes. And these compartments were similar to the structure of a honeycomb. And by observing this, he named these small compartments as the cell. And he thought that if in a living organism this kind of compartment of small boxes are present, then it may present in a living organism also. But at that time he could not observe or test it in a human body because in that year there were no microscopes having high resolutions and magnifications. But the cells of the living organisms could be observed only after the discovery of improved microscopes. So, after 150 years where the Robert Hooke observed this cell in the cork, we have able to know about the cells of the living organisms. It is because due to the improved microscopes having high magnification. Since we have said that the cell is a basic functional and the structural unit of a living body, so we compare this cell to the bricks. Like similar to the bricks were used to make the building, or it is the smallest unit which is used to make a wall of the building. Similarly, the cells are used and they are made together to make the structure on the similar function of an organ. But cells in the living organisms are more complex structure than that of a brick. In the given figure you can see the part A is shown the bricks and in the part B the onion peels cell structure is shown. In the brick wall you can see it is just a simple structure how they are attached to each other. But in an onion peel you can see. But if we compare this cell of a living organism then it will be more complex. So he thought of seeing these living organisms, but due to the absence of good microscopes he could not do this. After the resolutions of the microscopes, it was able to see that the cells in the living organisms are of variety in number, shape and size. So now we will see what the size, shape and the number tells us about. We know that in the living organisms there are millions of cells are present and that too of different shapes and sizes. We know that on our earth there are millions of the living organisms and different kinds of species present. And these species have billions and the trillions of cells present in them. And these trillions of cells are varying in the shapes and the sizes. Whether they are indifferent in number, in the shape or the size, but these different groups of cells perform a variety of functions. Similarly, on seeing the number, function and the shape and the size of the cell, we can just verify this and differentiate the organism on the basis of the number. He told that the organisms in some have number of the cell as a single and some have multiple cells present in them. So he said that the organisms which are made up of a single cell are known as a unicellular organism, in which uni means one and cellular means cell. That is, a single celled organism was named as a unicellular. Okay. Here the two figures are given in the down. First one is amoeba and the second one is paramecium. And both the organisms, according to the figure, you can see that have a single cell. So these organisms can be said as the unicellular organisms. And organisms that have more than one cell or have a multiple cell, that is equals to billion and the trillions of cells, then that organism was named as multicellular organisms. But it doesn't mean that if an organism have multi cells or a particular one cell or a single cell, that they will not affect the functions of the organisms. Because in amoeba and the paramecium we have learned that it is a single cell organism. But these single cell also perform the functions that are similar to that of a multicell. So, multicellular organisms carry out some functions which are similar to that of a single cell organisms. But the only difference is that a multicellular organisms, the functions are carried out by the group of the cells, and these group of cells perform a special and the similar functions. And these group of cells forming different organisms, this specialized cell group can be named as tissues. And these tissues in turn form the organs. Now, we will see that they varied in the number, so they can vary in the shape and the size. We can say that the cells in the different organisms varies in the size and the shape. In the earlier, we have seen a single-celled organism like amoeba. This amoeba has no definite shape. Like the other organisms on the earth have definite shapes, but this amoeba had used to be changing their shape. And they observed that they are having the projections out of their body. And these length protruding out of the body are said to be the false feet, means they are of different structure, and these were named as pseudopodia. And when this amoeba moves or the feeds, then these small projections, they used to be appear as well as disappear. Similarly, if we see in a human body, that is the white blood cells are the examples of the cells, and they also changes its shape. But if these are the examples, then there are billions of cells present inside us. Then what about the shape of these cells? So, then these different billions of cells have different specific functions and different shapes also. But we can say that generally cells are spherical, round, or the elongated shapes. And some of these cells are long, pointed, spherical, round, or elongated. And some of them also exhibit spindle shapes. But if we talk about the nerve cells or the blood cells, you can see here the figure where figure A shows you the spherical structure, which are the cells of the red bloods that are present inside the human body. And after that you can see the spindle shape. These are the shapes which are present in the muscles. And we talk about the third one, which is a long branched cell. And these cells are the nerve cells present inside the body. So, we can say that the cells present inside the human body are of different structure, shape and size. Now, if we talk about a cell, then they have an outer covering. So, the components which are present inside these cells are present and enclose themselves inside a membrane. Like we used to see the covering, if we keep any body to protect them, we used to keep a cover. Like cover books, we used to cover it with a thin covering, right? So this thin covering is similar to that in a cell. They cover themselves by the thin cover which is named as the membrane. These membrane provide the shape to the cell, that may be of the plants or the animals. And these additional covering which we used to make the thick covering so that it cannot diffuse or any other interference should be there with the components, and this outer covering is named as the cell wall. So we can say that the thin covering or outside the components of the cell is said to be the cell membrane, and the additional covering outside the cell membrane is said to be the cell wall. They give the shape and the rigidity to the cells. So we have seen that the cells vary in their size, shape as well as the number. Now we will see how this size also differ. We can say that the size of the cell in the living organisms can be so small, because we say that in the human body there are billions of cells present. So this should be as small as. So they are in the form of micrometer. That is, it is about 10 to the power minus 12 times that of a meter. So we can imagine that how small these cells are present inside our body. So to see them, they should be enlarged and magnified by using a microscope. If we see that in a bacteria, if the smallest cell present is of size 0.1 to 0.5 micrometer. So the size of the cell has no relation with the size of the body. It is not necessary that if the body is too large or the huge animal cell will be the hugest size, but if the size of the cell is related to its function. Like if we see the nerve cell present inside a human body as well as in the animal, they are long and the branched cell. So they perform the same function. And they perform the similar function that they receive and transfer the messages to the body. So that does not depend on the size that the functions will vary. So we can say that whether the size and shape changes, but they perform the similar functions, that may be in the plants or in the animals. In the cell structure and the function, we will see what is the structure of this cell. If we see, we say that the cells are different in number, different in size and different in shape. But if we talk about the living organisms, these cells came in a group, and this group make up tissues, and these tissues in turn make up the organ of a living organism or a non-living. So if tissues are made up of cells, so cell is a basic structural unit. If we go to the parts of the cell, we have read about the cell membrane and the cell wall. What the cell membrane was? It is the thin cover inside which the components of the cells are enclosed. And the outer covering on this cell membrane is the cell wall. So, cell wall is the additional covering around the cell membrane. Because the cells need the protection from the variation in temperature, wind, speed, atmospheric moisture, so they cannot move. Cells can be cover themselves inside the cell wall. So when he observed a cell inside the microscope, we can see that they are just making themselves around the body a dense, another thick covering, and this dense thick covering is said to be the cell wall. But here in each cell we can see a round shape, and this round shape in the center of the cell is said to be the nucleus. And inside the cell wall and outside the nucleus there is a jelly-like substance which is said to be the cytoplasm. This jelly-like structure present inside the cell membrane between the cell and the membrane of the cell is said to be the nucleus. Here you can see the cell of the human chicks. Here also the cytoplasm is present and the outer covering is said to be the cell wall, and the jelly-like structure between the nucleus and the cell wall is said to be the cytoplasm. And between the dense round shape between the cell is said to be the nucleus. And here the nucleus also will have to protect itself, so it also have an outer covering, and this outer covering outside the nucleus is said to be the nuclear membrane, similar to that to the cell membrane. So we can say that nucleus is an important component of the living cell, and it is a dense round, so we can say that it is generally round or a spherical in shape. It is located in the center of the cell. It separates it from the cytoplasm by a membrane called nuclear membrane. This membrane allows the movement of the materials and the cytoplasm inside the nucleus. And we can see that there are small structures present inside the nucleus, and these spherical bodies, smaller spherical round shapes present inside the nucleus are said to be the nucleolus. And in addition, outside the nucleus there are thread-like structures which are said to be chromosomes, and these chromosomes carry genes. We are familiar to this word genes further. How we know these genes? Because these genes carry the inheritance or the characters from the parent cell to the offsprings. So these chromosomes can only be seen during the cell divisions. So what we have learned in this class, that cells have different in number, they have different sizes and shapes, and during the seeing the objects cell, we can say that cell have a thin covering which is said to be the cell membrane, and the additional thick covering around this cell membrane was said to be the cell wall. And inside the cell wall there is a jelly-like structure which is named as cytoplasm, and there is a dense round shape to be found between the center that is present at the center of the cell, and this is named as nucleus. And the small spherical structures present inside the nucleus is said to be nucleolus, and it protects the cell from the nuclear membrane. And the small thread-like structures present in the nucleus is said to be the chromosomes, and these chromosomes carry genes, and these chromosomes can only be seen during the cell division, as they transfer the inheritance or the characters from the parent to that of the offspring. So in the next class we will be seeing the more functions and the parts of the cell. So thank you class. In the further classes we will be learning the more topics.